Welcome back, Hornets. We are ready for part 3 of lesson 13A. Today we're going to be on page 139. If you don't have your ready workbook out, take a minute to pause the video and make sure you have out your ready workbook, as well as a pencil, a pen, or a highlighter. And whenever you have all those materials, we will go ahead and get started. So, the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite the title of my lesson up at the top of the page. And my title is Analyzing the Impact of Word Choice. So now I'm going to go ahead and start breaking apart my title. We know analyzing means that we are going to break something down to take a closer look at it. This word impact focuses on how something is affected or changed. And word choice partially involves what the author means in their writing. And word choice can focus on a few things. So it can focus on figurative language, which we've been talking about a good bit. It can focus on connotative language, which is the feeling behind a word or a phrase. It can also focus on literary devices, which are tricks or special effects authors use in their writing, such as idioms and imagery. And the last thing we're going to look at are our sound devices, which we have really been focused on this lesson. So the sound devices, remember that we are focused on are word repetition, alliteration, and assonance. All are types of repetition. So focusing on words or phrases getting repeated as well as sounds. So anytime we are analyzing the impact of word choice. So we are breaking down the effect of the author's word choice to figure out what the author means. We have to focus on tone, so the tone of the text, and whether or not it's positive, negative, or neutral. And we also have to focus on the author's word choice, specific word choice, to decide if the words they are using are strong or weak words. Okay, so now that our title is broken down, let's go ahead and look at our directions and see what it's asking us to do. So, our directions say to continue reading the story about Anna. So, we're going to pick up where we left off and we're going to continue reading this story about Anna. And if you remember anything about Anna, we know that she is a servant girl working for Princess Sophia. And we also have to use the close reading and the hint to help us answer the question. So the close reading is going to help us guide our reading, and the hint will help us answer the question. So before we actually get into the story, let's take a minute to refresh on what we remember from the story from last time. So the title of our story is The View from the Carriage. So I'm going to write that down below. And we said a carriage was a type of like a horse-drawn um, compartment that they used for travel. And Anna is riding in this carriage with Princess Sophia, right? And where we left off, she had realized the road that they were traveling on is the road that would lead her back to her home where her family is. And she's excited about this road, she's excited about being on the road, but she also has to restrain her feelings because Princess Sophia has certain expectations for her. And we also talked about the genre of the story and how this is realistic fiction. So, because it is fiction, we know that it's not real. However, it is realistic. So, fiction means it's not real, but it could happen. because it's realistic. So it's fiction that is very realistic. And we know the purpose of anything that is fiction is to entertain the reader. So that's the purpose of this story about Anna and Princess Sophia. It's to entertain us. And we know that anything that's fiction as well has certain elements that it must have for it to be fiction. So it has to have characters, it has to have it has to have a setting, a time and a location, it has to have conflict and it has to have plot. But for it to be realistic fiction, all of that has to be realistic. So the characters have to be very lifelike, the setting has to be realistic, so it can't take place like in a faraway fantasy land or space. It has to be on Earth, something that we could see in our lives. The conflict that the characters has to deal with has to be realistic, so they're not going to have to go fight monsters or anything like that. And the characters themselves have to be realistic. So all of that, all of the normal elements a story must have still come into play. It all just has to be realistic. So let's go ahead and get into the story. We know that this is a continuation from page 138 that we read last time, and our paragraphs are already numbered for us, so we don't have to do that. So, what we're going to do, I'm going to read this to you once, and then we're going to go back and do our close reading. So, we're going to do a cold reading first, just for understanding, and then we're going to go back and analyze with our close reading box. So, I'm going to read this to you. I want you to follow along. A crew of workers bent gathering turnips in a field all stood at the sound of the coming carriage. And there, in front of Anna's very eyes, was her entire family, her mother, her father, her sister, Sonia, her brother Peter. But no sooner did she bring their beloved familiar faces into focus than they all dropped to one knee and bowed their heads in deference to the passing princess. Anna saw her father risk raising his eyes, and their eyes met but a moment before he lowered them and smiled. She raised a hand to him, but the princess sternly stopped her, saying, "We do not wave to commoners from this carriage." Anna choked back the words, "But they're my family." The royal carriage rolled on, but Anna's heart stayed behind. All right, so that's kind of a sad little story we've got going, right? Poor Anna. So let's go ahead and get into our close reading and see what it's asking us to do. So it says, what sound devices does the author use in this excerpt? We're going to have to circle repeated words and underline words that show alliteration. So let's take a minute. This is a perfect opportunity for us to refresh on our sound devices. So we have word repetition, which is just words and phrases that get repeated over and over. We have alliteration, which focuses on the repetition of consonant sounds. And then we have assonance, which focuses on the repetition of vowel sounds. So all of these work together to create unity in a text. So any type of repetition, they all work together and what I mean by unity is they're all working together to help the text have the same meaning and tone. So it all works together to establish a meaning and tone for that text. So we know what our close reading has told us. We're going to have to go back through the passage and we're going to have to circle repeated words and underline words that show alliteration, so our consonant sounds. So I want you to take a minute, read over this one more time, and this time I want you to circle words that are being repeated, words or phrases, and I want you to underline words that have alliteration, so the repetition of the consonant sound. So pause the video, take a minute and do this, and we're going to come back and go over it together. All right, guys, so I'm assuming that you are back because you have found some examples for us for word repetition and alliteration. So let's go through paragraph 3 and 4 and see what we found. So the first example that I found was well, let's let's do our word repetition first. Let's just do that. I found a good example of word repetition in paragraph 3, with this repeating word her. And it says, there in front of Anna's very eyes was her entire family, her mother, her father, her sister, Sonia, and her brother, Peter. So that word her is getting repeated. So we know anytime that an author chooses to repeat a certain word or phrase, they're trying to bring our attention to it and let us know that there's something important about this word. So, what do you think the author's trying to? Why do you think the author would want to repeat this word, her? What's he talking about? What belongs to her? What belongs to Anna? Well, it's talking about her family here. It's pointing out each individual member. She's getting to see her entire family. She's getting to see her mother, her father, her sister, and her brother. So we know that this family, her family, is important to her. So the author is trying to help us understand that Anna's family is very important to her. So this was really our only example of word repetition, the most important one for sure. So now let's go ahead and talk about a few examples of alliteration. So in paragraph 3, the first example of alliteration I found was this these two words, coming carriage. They have that beginning consonant k sound, coming carriage. So that's getting repeated. Another example I found in paragraph 3 was familiar faces into focus. So familiar faces and focus all have that repetition of the consonant sound. And then I also found another one at the end, passing princess. It begins with that p sound, that hard consonant sound. So coming, familiar, and passing all have very kind of rough um hard consonant sounds at the beginning of those. In paragraph 4, we have risk raising. That's a softer consonant sound with our R, the R. And then we have sternly stopped here with that beginning sound for our consonant. So I think we have found that's several good examples of alliteration. So let's go ahead and talk about tone. We need to talk about the overall tone for this passage. So yesterday, or not yesterday, last week, whenever we did part 2, we talked about the overall tone and how it was very excited. So she's excited, right? But she's having to restrain her feelings. So we said the overall tone was positive. There were a lot of those positive tone words. Um, so we said our tone was excited, yet restrained or cautious. So, do you think the tone is still positive overall? So we have a few words here that's talking about, well, let's just work through it. So in paragraph 3 we have this word beloved. So beloved means that you care about someone, that you love them, right? So that's a positive word. Um this word, deference, do you have any idea what that means? Try to use your context clues to figure it out. But I'll go ahead and tell you. Deference means that you are like humbly respecting someone or submitting to them. So if they're getting down to one knee and bowing their heads to the princess, they are showing that they respect her and but they're also submitting to her at the same time. So that's kind of negative. They're dropping to their one knee, right? And then it talks about how Anna's father's having to risk raising his eyes to meet her gaze. If you're having to make a risk, that's not really a positive feeling, right? If you're having to take a risk, there could be consequences. Let's see. And we have this phrase here, sternly. So the princess is sternly stopping her. So that's a negative feeling. If the princess has to be stern, it's like she's kind of chiding her, getting on to her by saying we don't wave at commoners. Um, and she uses that word commoners, right? To refer to the people working out to the field. So if she's calling them a commoner, that's not very positive, right? And then in response, it says Anna's having to choke back her words. Well, if you were choking, that's not a pleasant feeling, right? So she's having to choke back her words. And then we have this phrase here, Anna's heart stayed behind. So she's kind of feeling very, I would say almost kind of sad here. She sees her family in the distance, but that's all that she really gets to do. So I would say the tone for this part of the text is definitely more negative than positive, right? Definitely more negative here. All right, so now that we have broken apart our text, we have figured out the end of Anna's story. Let's go ahead and move on down to our question. So we know that we have this hint that's going to help us out. So let's look at it first. And it says, was Anna certain she would see anyone in her family? How does she react to seeing them? So if you remember back whenever we did part two, um, the text said that she might get to see her family. She doesn't know that she didn't know that she would see them. She said she might actually have a chance, but it wasn't set in stone. So she didn't know that she would get to see them. So now we have to talk about how she reacts to seeing them. So it says that what does she do in response to seeing her family? Well, it says that she raises her hand to wave, right? So we already know that she's excited. She wants to wave to them. And then she kind of gets in trouble with the princess for that. So she's excited. She tries to wave at them. Okay, so we know that we're going to be thinking about those things in our question. So let's go ahead and look at our directions. And it tells us that we have to circle the correct answer. And this is our question. Which choice best describes the impact of the repetition of her in paragraph 3 of the story? So we are going to look back up at paragraph 3 where we circled that word her. So we already know that that's an example of word repetition, right? So we have to ask ourselves, why is this important? And we also have to ask ourselves, why does the author do it? So why does the author repeat that word her? Okay, so let's look at our answer choices and see what we can come up with. So, actually, I want you to answer this question first, and then I want you to come back and check your answer with mine because this is good practice for you to see what you can come up with on your own instead of relying on me. So, take a minute, read the question, read your answer choices again, see what you can come up with, and then come back and check your answer. All right, guys. So I'm assuming that you are back. You have checked your answer. So let's go ahead and work through it. So our question was, which choice best describes the impact of the repetition of her in paragraph 3 of the story? So let's go ahead and work this out. Answer choice by answer choice. So answer choice A says it helps the reader understand how time hurries by for Anna. So this answer choice is focusing on how time is passing. Nothing in the passage really expresses how time is passing by for her, and they don't use that word her to focus on time passing by. So answer choice A is out for us because we are not focused on time in paragraph 3. Answer choice B, it says it creates a rhythm that matches the turning wheels of the carriage. So this is focusing on rhythm, which has to do with sound. So more so sound devices, so it would be more so alliteration and assonance than our word repetition, because the word her repeating does not really match the turning of the wheels, that sound that it would make underneath the carriage. Um, if this was another example of like a sound, um, it might work, but we're not focused on sounds here. We're focused on the repetition of a word, a single word. So because of that, answer choice B is not the best option for us. So let's look at answer choice C. It suggests the deep connection Anna feels with each family member. So what it's telling here is that telling us here is that she feels a very deep connection with each of her family members. So the author feels the need to point out each family member by saying it's her mother, her father, her sister, her brother. So we already talked about whenever we were looking at the passage that her family is important to us. So this could be a very good answer choice for us, but before we decide, we need to look at answer choice D. So it emphasizes Anna's difficulty in finding her family among the crew. Well, we know emphasize means that it's trying to bring our attention to something, and the repetition of the word her is trying to bring our attention to something, but it's not the fact that she has difficulty finding her family among the crew that's working in the fields, because she does not have difficulty picking them out from the rest. She spots them immediately. So we know that answer choice D is just incorrect all around because it's not true. So answer choice C is the only one that works for us. It's the only one that's correct because it's the only one um, that is expressing her deep connection to her family members. So answer choice C is the best one. All right, so now let's go ahead and move on down to the show your thinking section. And our show your thinking writing prompt says to explain why the repetition of her is important to the meaning of the passage. So we are trying to look at this word her again, which we have been dealing with in the passage and then our multiple choice and again in our writing prompt. So we're going to have to explain how that repeating word is important to the meaning of the passage. So you have to ask yourself, why is this important? What is the author really trying to get across by repeating that word her over and over again? And you can use your multiple choice question to help you out for this. It can help give you some ideas of what to write. But I want you to do this on your own, guys. I want you to pause the video, write your answer in your workbook, and then you're going to come back and check it with mine once again. So go ahead and pause the video now. Brainstorm some possible ideas and go ahead and get your writing going and complete thoughts. And whenever you have that finished, you can come back and we will discuss. All right. I will see you in just a bit. All right, guys, we are back. So let's go ahead and start talking about this show your thinking writing prompt. So, once again, you had to explain why the repetition of the word her is important to the meaning of the passage. So, why is that repeating word her important to the passage? What does it help the reader understand about Anna or her family? So, this is the answer I came up with. Your answer may be a little bit different from mine.